the storyteller of the starship Calypso. The hum of the Calypso was the only sound that filled the observation deck, a quiet mechanical breath that reminded Elia Rhone of her childhood bedroom during storms. Constant, reassuring, full of promise. She stood alone, staring out at the void of space, the stars scattered like embers from a fire the universe had long since forgotten. Her fingers hovered over the worn leather journal tucked beneath her datapad. It was an old habit, writing by hand, the slow movement of pen on paper helping her untangle the chaos in her mind. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't even supposed to be on this mission. Yet here she was, Elia Rhone, cultural anthropologist and officially listed as a historical archivist, had become something else in the eyes of the Calypso's crew. A curiosity, a relic. They called her the storyteller. At first, she'd taken offense. Now, she wore the title like a cloak. After all, someone had to remember the soul of humanity. The door behind her hissed open, and Commander Voss's heavy boots echoed across the deck. "Elia," he said curtly, "briefing in 10. We're approaching the Theron signal." She turned to face him. The commander was tall, all angles and armor, his expression as rigid as the protocols he clung to. He didn't hide his disdain for her presence. "Do they know what it means yet?" she asked. Voss shook his head. "No language, no math, no symbols, just images, dreams. Our linguists say it's nonsense." Elia's eyes lit up. "Not nonsense. It's myth." Voss blinked. "Myth." She tapped her datapad. The alien transmission had been looping for days. Fragments of color, emotion, ancient structures fading into ash, a silhouette of a child holding a glowing orb. It was less a message and more feeling. And that was why the computers couldn't translate it. "They're telling us a story," Elia said softly. "They're trying to communicate the only way they remember how." Voss crossed his arms. "We didn't travel 40 light years to listen to bedtime stories." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You traveled 40 light years hoping for something rational. And maybe, just maybe, they're hoping for someone who still believes in wonder." The silence between them stretched. "Be ready," Voss finally said, and left without another word. The briefing room was tense, filled with hard stares and muted skepticism. Scientists flipped through holograms of alien landscapes. Engineers studied energy signatures. But no one could make sense of the transmission. No one but her. Elia stepped forward, voice steady but passionate. "These aren't coordinates or technical specs. This is symbolic memory. A civilization trying to express identity after forgetting how to speak in formulas. We've been so focused on contact through science, but maybe they're reaching out through story." Murmurs followed. Someone scoffed. But then the captain nodded slowly. "Go on." Elia breathed in. "What if this species once passed down knowledge like us? Through myth, legend, oral history. Maybe they encoded their essence in archetypes like humans did before we had books or code. Maybe they remember us, not through fact, but through feeling." The room quieted. "The message ends with an image," she said. "A spiral of stars folding into the shape of an open hand. That's not noise. That's invitation." By the time the Calypso entered the Theron system, Elia felt like she was holding her breath. The planet came into view, bathed in an opalescent haze. Clouds shimmered unnaturally, reflecting a strange iridescent spectrum. The cities below, if that's what they were, seemed etched into the surface itself, ancient and untouched. But no transmissions followed. No responses. Only silence. "It's like a museum," the pilot whispered. "No," Elia murmured, tears catching in her throat. "It's like a story paused in the middle." She touched the side of her journal again, where she'd written a line just before takeoff. "Every civilization has its storytellers. Some pass down weapons. Others pass down wonder. They didn't know what they were about to find. But deep down, Elia felt it wasn't tech or power that would bridge the gap. It was empathy. It was memory. It was imagination. And for the first time since she'd stepped on board, she knew this was where she was meant to be. The world without history. The Calypso descended in slow silence, its hull slicing through the strange upper atmosphere like a whisper. Below, the planet stretched out like a dream suspended in time. Pale green plains, vast obsidian cities, rivers that shimmered like polished glass. No smoke, no fire, no movement, no life. Elia Rhone stood near the forward viewport, her fingers curled around the handrail. Even now, as the alien landscape unfurled beneath them, part of her wondered if this was all some elaborate metaphor. A world without people, a city without sound, a species that had forgotten how to speak. "We're setting down in what looks like a central plaza," reported Lieutenant Wren, eyes scanning the data feed. Surrounding structures resemble amphitheaters, data towers, some kind of communal hubs. But there's no power signature, no EM field, just residual energy. Commander Voss nodded grimly. "Proceed." The landing was gentle, almost reverent. The ramp hissed open. Dust stirred across the ancient stone. Elia stepped out last, her boots pressing into the surface like the closing of a book no one had ever finished reading. The plaza stretched before them, framed by towering columns carved with spirals and light-etched symbols. But the most striking feature lay at its center, a massive sphere, floating just above the ground, cracked and inert. It looked like a giant memory orb, similar to those used in old Terra museums. And then, without warning, the orb pulsed faintly. A shimmer. A flicker. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "I saw a glitch," Voss replied. But he was watching it too, jaw tight. As they approached, the air shifted, warmer, heavier. Elia felt it first, a hum beneath her ribs, like the pull of a forgotten lullaby. "I think it's responding to us," she said softly. A moment later, the orb activated. Not with words, not with sounds, with images. The plaza fell away. In its place bloomed a living memory, ghost-like holograms playing out across the square like a silent theater. Dozens of alien children, their features tall and delicate, sat in concentric rings around an elder. The elder moved their hands in sweeping gestures, light-forming pictures in the air. Starships, forest beasts, a glowing spiral held in a child's hand. And then it all stopped. The elder vanished. The children flickered away like smoke. Elia stepped forward, blinking away sudden tears. "They were telling a story," she whispered, "and it was never finished." Wren scanned the orb. "It's not broadcasting. It's waiting. For something. A key," Voss muttered. "If this is some kind of archive, where's the interface?" Elia closed her eyes. The moment felt impossibly fragile, like a story on the edge of being forgotten forever. She knelt beside the orb, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Once there was a boy who asked the stars why they twinkled. The stars didn't answer, so he built a rocket and flew into the sky. He visited the moon, then Mars, then the rings of Saturn. Still, no answer. Finally, he came to a quiet star at the edge of the galaxy. It wasn't bright, it wasn't large, but it listened. And when the boy asked why stars twinkled, the little star replied, "Because someone has to remind the universe it's still alive." As her voice echoed through the plaza, the orb glowed. Not just glowed, opened. A soft hum rose as light spiraled upward in elegant coils. A new projection formed, showing lines of alien text, images, and, most stunningly, recordings of the planet's last broadcast before silence. Elia stood slowly awed. It listened, understood a story. Back aboard the Calypso, the decryption teams worked furiously. What they found confirmed Elia's fears and deepened the mystery. The Kthari, as the species called themselves, had once built a thriving culture. Their stories weren't just entertainment. They were the very framework of memory and history passed down through generations. Instead of storing knowledge digitally, they embedded it in myth, told from elder to child. But something had happened. A schism. A movement within their society that deemed imagination a liability. Over time, they began to purge stories, remove metaphor, erase fables. Elia read the final entry from a Kthari elder. It chilled her. When the stories end, the soul cannot follow. We will forget how we dreamed, And without dreams, what are we? She stared at the line for a long time. Commander, she said, turning to Voss. This wasn't a failure of science. This was the consequence of forgetting how to imagine. Voss didn't reply. Not with scorn, not with logic. Only silence. And that silence said everything. The inheritance of silence. Elia stared at the playback again, letting the final words of the Cathari elder echo in her ears. When the stories end, the soul cannot follow. We will forget how we dreamed. And without dreams, what are we? She leaned forward in the dim glow of the archive chamber, her breath caught in her throat. The data recovered from the orb had revealed the truth, piece by heartbreaking piece. This world hadn't fallen to war, plague, or cosmic disaster. It had quietly collapsed under the weight of its own forgetting. The Cathari had once been extraordinary, an advanced, luminous species who passed not just knowledge, but experience through a genetic mechanism known as dream inheritance. Memories weren't just recorded. They were felt, encoded in neural-laced DNA, gifted from one generation to the next like ancestral myth. But then came the reclamation doctrine, a cultural revolution led by technocratic purists who believed stories were a weakness, irrational, inefficient, unnecessary. The imagination gene, as they called it, was deemed unstable. So they engineered it out. Within 2 generations, the Cathari stopped dreaming. No more symbolic memory. No more passed-down epics or inherited emotions. Just silence. Elia sat in the archive's circle of light, trembling with a quiet kind of grief. She had dedicated her life to understanding the role of myth in shaping civilizations. But this was something else entirely. This was a species that had surgically erased its own soul. Commander Voss approached from behind, his voice low and hesitant. They did this to themselves? Elia nodded, in the pursuit of perfect logic. He exhaled slowly, arms crossed. We came looking for intelligent life, and all we found was a graveyard. No, she said softly, standing. Not a graveyard. A memory. One that can still wake. She tapped her datapad. The orb didn't just play back. It responded. That means their dreaming pathways might still exist. Dormant, maybe, but not destroyed. You think you can wake a dead culture with bedtime stories? He asked, the old edge in his voice creeping back. Elia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped up to the central interface, now glowing faintly with recursive alien symbols. She placed her hand gently on the surface and spoke. In the days before Earth had cities or rockets, we sat beneath the stars and told each other stories. Stories of animals that spoke, trees that wept, gods who fell in love with mortals. They weren't real, but they made us real. They taught us hope, fear, courage. They showed us what it meant to be alive. We are the species who asked the dark questions and answered them with light. We are the children of 1,000 fables. And that is why we remember. That is why we survive. Her voice echoed across the archive. The orb shimmered, flickered, then pulsed. Suddenly, the chamber filled with cascading streams of light, like stardust caught in a hurricane. A projection formed, full body, radiant, alive. An alien figure emerged from the storm of memory. Tall, graceful, skin like polished stone, eyes glowing like distant nebulae. They regarded Elia with slow reverence. You are the one who speaks in shapes of emotion, the figure said. The voice was not a sound, but a blend of light, feeling, and resonance that danced across Elia's mind like music. She stepped closer, stunned. Who are you? I am Thren, last keeper of the unspoken flame, last born of the dreaming ones. Commander Voss stiffened. Are you real? A projection? I am both shadow and self, Thren answered. A remnant of the final dream passed through light. I exist because she believed someone would come who still remembers. She, Elia asked, my mother, the last storyteller. She encoded me into the orb, waiting for the story to return. Elia's throat tightened. What happened to the others? They forgot, and forgetting is a kind of death. Thren looked around the room, voice vibrating with sorrow. But your stories, they awaken echoes. They stir the sleeping sparks buried in the bones of our world. For the first time, Commander Voss didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He simply watched, mouth slightly open, as the Cathari projection reached out. Will you share more? Elia nodded. Yes, as many as it takes. Thren's form shimmered brighter. Then let us remember together. Back aboard the Calypso, Elia worked through the night. She recorded Earth's oldest tales and humanity's first myths. She read fairy tales, legends, bedtime stories, and epics. The Calypso's databanks became a library of human imagination, offered not as proof of dominance, but as a gift of remembrance. And as each story was received, more echoes awakened across the planet. Soft lights lit up old towers. Forgotten pathways opened. The silence cracked, and the Cathari began to stir. Sparks in the ashes. The city began to glow. Not brightly, not all at once, but slowly, like cinders in an old hearth beginning to stir beneath the ash. Street lamps that hadn't lit in centuries flickered to life. Holographic murals began to shimmer along stone walls. Towers once inert and silent, pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. And at the center of it all, the orb responded with deeper complexity. It was no longer just playing back memories. It was learning, reweaving itself with every story Elia shared. For the first time since landing, Elia wasn't alone in the plaza. Small figures, projections of Cathari children, sat cross-legged around her as she spoke, each one flickering with a soft, golden outline. They weren't ghosts. They were echoes, preserved fragments of what once was. And they were listening. There was once a little girl, Elia began, sitting in the center of the ancient amphitheater, voice calm and warm, who lived on a ship among the stars. She had no home, only stories, each one a different place, a different people. And when she was scared, she told those stories aloud, not to be heard, but to remember she existed. The children echoes didn't blink. They didn't breathe, but they leaned closer. Commander Voss stood nearby, arms folded, his stern expression unreadable. But even he couldn't deny it. Something was happening. What had once been dust and ruin was now awakening, as if the very planet had held its breath for centuries, waiting for someone to say, "Once upon a time." As Elia continued, Thren appeared again, his projection sharper, brighter. "These stories," he said, "they bring color where there was only gray." Elia looked up, because memory isn't just data. It's feeling. It's being seen. Thren knelt beside her. "There are remnants of us still asleep in the soil, beneath the cities scattered in code and fiber. But without context, they are meaningless. Your stories give shape to our past. Then we'll keep going," she whispered, "until your people can dream again." Later that night, Elia returned to the Calypso. She was exhausted, emotionally raw, her voice nearly gone from speaking. But her mind raced. In the quiet of her quarters, she opened her leather-bound journal. Not the datapad, not the AI recorder. The journal. She needed ink and pressure and paper, permanence. She wrote, "Today I watched a civilization begin to breathe again. Not because we brought them technology, not because we taught them math or gave them new machines, but because we brought them fables. Because we said, 'You mattered.'" She paused, the pen trembling in her hand. Is that what inheritance truly is? Not what we build, but what we choose to remember and share. A soft chime broke her focus. Incoming message. It was for Voss. She hesitated. Their conversations had always been strained. Logic versus instinct, precision versus emotion. She tapped the screen. "Rhone," Voss said, his voice lower than usual, "come to the bridge. You need to see this." When she arrived, the crew stood in quiet awe. Outside the viewport, the planet had changed again. Above the city, long-dormant satellites had activated. They now pulsed in orbit, casting a net of holographic signals downward. But they weren't broadcasting commands. They were receiving. From underground, Thren appeared again, his form now drifting among the consoles. "You have opened the first door," he said. "There are others. Vaults hidden across our world, each locked by a different kind of story. Not fact, not formula, but emotional truth. Archetype, myth, symbol. Voss frowned. And if we open them, we may dream once more. A hushed silence fell across the room. Elia stepped forward, heart pounding. These aren't just vaults, she said. They're story temples, each one guarded by a different part of your cultural soul. Like chapters in a book no one finished reading. Voss finally nodded, his voice distant. Then it's time we turn the page. The next few days were a blur. The Calypso crew split into exploration teams, guided by the evolving projections of Thren and the Children Echoes. Each vault they approached responded differently. Some to poems, others to lullabies, some only to tales of loss and forgiveness. Elia found herself acting as a bridge, not translator but listener. And each time a vault opened, something long lost returned. An emotion, a custom, a ghost of a people reaching forward through time, hungry to remember who they once were. One evening, Elia stood in the ruins of an old learning hall, now softly humming with energy. Thren appeared beside her, watching her carefully. Your species, it remembers differently than ours, he said. She smiled. We remember by telling, even when it hurts. And we, he whispered, forgot by forgetting. He looked out across the stars. But thanks to you, perhaps our ending is not the end. The dream rekindled. The final vault stood at the edge of the world, high on a cragged cliff, carved into the bones of a blackened mountain. It waited, silent and untouched by time. The air was thin. The light dimmed as if the sky itself feared disturbing what lay within. Elia Rhone stood before the vault's gate, her heart a thunderous pulse. Unlike the others, this one had no panel, no orb, no symbol. Just a smooth stone surface, featureless and cold. Yet the silence around it was alive, expectant, like breath held in anticipation of a final word. This was the last place we tried to forget, said Thren, his form flickering beside her. He looked tired now, dimmer than before. What did you forget? She asked. He closed his eyes. Love, loss, the truth that we once wept. Elia glanced behind her. Commander Voss and a small team stood nearby, waiting but saying nothing. They knew, as she did, that this was the end of something. Not just the expedition, not just the story, but the silence that had swallowed a world. She approached the gate. No device would open it. No frequency. No scan. Just truth. Elia took a deep breath and began to speak. Not a tale from Earth, but her own story. I used to think stories were just decorations, she said, voice trembling. Little distractions from the things that mattered. Science, progress, survival. But when my mother died, all I had left was the stories she used to tell me. They were small, gentle, simple, but every time I remembered them, I felt her arms around me. I remembered that I was loved, that she had existed, that I had mattered to her. I tried to bury those stories for years. Thought I needed to grow up, be strong, be rational. But now I know those stories were the strongest part of me. And so I give you this, Kthari, a piece of my own inheritance. Not of blood, but of memory, because I know you lost yours, and no one deserves to be forgotten. Her voice broke, and still, no movement. Voss stepped forward, his usual stoicism gone. Elia, he said softly, tell them how it ended. She nodded. Her tears were real now, glinting in the gray light. When I was 10, my mother was dying. I asked her to tell me the dragon story one last time. The one where the fire didn't burn, where it only lit the sky. She could barely whisper, but she said, the dragon flies still, my love. You'll see it in every sunset. And she died with her hand in mine. She touched the cold stone. That was the first story I ever finished alone. The vault shuddered. A crack formed down the center. Then another. The light that poured from within was not mechanical, not structured. It was feeling. Grief and wonder, joy and sorrow, awe and loss. The full spectrum of a culture rediscovering itself in one sacred breath. The doors parted. Inside, the chamber was filled with soft, golden threads of memory, spiraling like constellations. Holographic imprints of real Kthari emerged. Not echoes, not shadows, but actual preserved identities. Parents, lovers, children, elders. Whole lives once lost to silence, now returning like birds to spring. Thren stepped into the chamber. As he did, his form changed, sharpened. No longer translucent, no longer a drifting thought, but a man. Solid. Real. He turned to Elia, tears, real tears, streaming down his cheeks. "I remember my mother's voice," he whispered. "I remember her laugh. I remember who I am." The vault's central pillar lit up. A final message appeared, written in both Cathari and translated Terran. "The soul is the story it tells itself. We die only when we stop listening." 3 days later, the Calypso left orbit. Elia sat alone in her quarters, watching as the once dark planet now shimmered with gentle light. Memory orbs bloomed across the surface like lanterns in a vast ocean. The Cathari had not returned in full, but their essence had been revived. Their legacy rewoven. They would not forget again. Commander Voss appeared in her doorway, unusually quiet. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did, and they did. All I did was speak what was already inside me." He nodded, stepping beside her to gaze at the reborn world. "What now?" he asked. Elia smiled, her voice filled with both ache and awe. "Now we remember, and we tell the next story." In the final log of the Calypso's mission, Elia recorded, "There are truths that data can't hold. Truths that don't fit in graphs or equations. Truths that only stories can carry, because they aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be felt." The Cathari didn't lose their future because they lacked science. They lost it because they abandoned wonder. But wonder can return, even after silence, even after forgetting, because somewhere, someone always remembers the dragon still flies.